The rusty $1 tractor hid a secret so dangerous that powerful men hunted a homeless Navy SEAL and his dog for it. A homeless Navy SEAL bought a rusty tractor for $1. His dog found worth a fortune under the hood. Beneath the shadow of Montana's Bitterroot Mountains, former Navy SEAL Ethan Walker had lost almost everything except his loyal German shepherd, Shadow. When a county auction sells him a rusted tractor for his last dollar, the crowd laughs. But when Shadow refuses to leave the machine, Ethan uncovers a hidden secret that leads to buried fortunes, forgotten crimes, and a truth someone will do anything to keep hidden. Comment 1 if you would investigate the tractor, or 0 if you would leave it alone, and tell us where you're watching from. The first light of dawn spilled across the Bitterroot Mountains like liquid gold, painting the jagged peaks of western Montana in shades of amber and pale orange. Frost clung stubbornly to the grass along the valley floor, sparkling beneath the rising sun. The world was waking up. But Ethan Walker had never really gone to sleep. He sat alone on the narrow metal step outside an aging camper trailer, parked beside an abandoned farmstead, several miles outside the town of Darby. A dented coffee mug rested in his hands. Steam drifted upward into the cold mountain air. His eyes were fixed on the distant mountains, watching. Always watching. At 42 years old, Ethan looked older than his age. His dark hair was streaked with early gray. Deep lines carved their way across his weathered face. The years since leaving the Navy had been harder than anything he had experienced overseas. Most people assumed war ended when soldiers came home. For Ethan, it had followed him, every night, every dream, every silence. Behind him, the camper door creaked open. A large German shepherd stepped outside. Shadow. The dog moved quietly, almost cautiously, before lowering himself beside Ethan. His thick black and tan coat glowed in the morning sunlight. Intelligent amber eyes studied Ethan's face. Shadow always seemed to know. Without speaking, Ethan reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. The shepherd leaned against his leg. Neither of them moved. For several minutes, man and dog simply sat together while the valley woke around them. Birds called from the cottonwood trees. A distant ranch truck rumbled down a gravel road. Somewhere beyond the hills, cattle bawled. Life moved forward. It always did, even when people didn't. Ethan finally stood and stretched his aching back. "Come on, partner." Shadow immediately rose. The dog never needed a leash, never needed commands. Years together had created something deeper than training. They understood each other. Inside the camper, space was limited. A narrow bed, a small propane stove, a folding table, several military duffel bags, photographs stored inside a weathered metal box, and not much else. It wasn't much of a home, but it was all Ethan had. 3 years earlier, things had been different. He'd had a small house, a wife, plans. Then came the panic attacks, the nightmares, the inability to sit in crowded rooms, the endless guilt. His marriage collapsed beneath burdens neither of them knew how to carry. Medical bills followed, then debt, then foreclosure. One loss led to another, until eventually all that remained was the camper and Shadow. The dog had been assigned to Ethan during one of his final deployments overseas. When Shadow retired from service, Ethan had fought to adopt him. Looking back, it was the best decision he'd ever made. Some days the dog was the only reason he got out of bed. The morning passed the same way most mornings did. Work. A local rancher needed help repairing a fence line damaged by winter storms. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough for gasoline and groceries, enough to survive another week. By noon, Ethan's hands were blistered and sore. The Montana sun climbed high overhead. Dust drifted across the open pasture. Shadow remained nearby, alert and watchful as always. The ranch owner, a heavy-set man named Walt Peterson handed Ethan a bottle of water. "You ever think about settling down somewhere?" Walt asked. Ethan offered a faint smile. "Used to." Walt nodded awkwardly. People often ran out of things to say around Ethan. Veterans made civilians uncomfortable sometimes, especially the broken ones. By late afternoon, the work was finished. Walt paid him in cash. Not much, but enough. As Ethan loaded his tools into the truck, Walt pointed toward town. "County auction tomorrow." Ethan looked up. "What kind of auction?" "Estate liquidation." Walt shrugged. "Old equipment? Farm junk? Machinery?" "Maybe some useful stuff," Ethan nodded politely. He didn't think much about it. Until later that night. The wind rattled the camper walls. Shadow slept near the door. Ethan sat alone beneath a dim overhead light, counting what little money remained. The total wasn't encouraging. A few worn bills, some loose change, and exactly $1 left after fuel expenses. $1. The reality would have frightened most people. Oddly, Ethan felt nothing. He'd been broke before, many times. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him toward sleep. But as always, sleep came with memories. The mountains disappeared. The camper disappeared. Montana disappeared. Sand replaced snow. Heat replaced cold. The smell of dust and smoke filled his lungs. Gunfire echoed somewhere far away. Then closer. Then everywhere. Faces emerged. Men he remembered. Men he didn't. Friends, brothers, teammates, some alive, some not. One face stayed longer than the others. Tyler Morgan, the youngest man in Ethan's unit. 24 years old. A smile that never seemed to disappear. Until it did. Ethan jerked awake. His heart pounded violently. Sweat soaked his shirt. The darkness inside the camper felt suffocating. For several seconds, he couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't remember where he was. Then a familiar weight pressed against his side. Shadow. The dog had climbed onto the bed. His head rested across Ethan's chest. The shepherd remained perfectly still. Steady. Present. Real. Gradually, the panic faded. Ethan wrapped an arm around the dog. "Thanks, buddy." Shadow's tail thumped once. Outside, dawn approached again. The next morning arrived cold and clear. The county auction was already crowded when Ethan pulled into town. Old pickup trucks lined the dusty fairground. Farmers, mechanics, collectors, curious locals. People gathered around rows of equipment baking beneath the sun. Tractors, plows, generators, welders, tools. Most of it looked worn out. Some looked ancient. Ethan wandered through the crowd with Shadow at his side. The dog drew attention immediately. People always noticed Shadow. Not Ethan. Never Ethan. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the lot. Bidding began. Equipment changed hands quickly. Prices climbed, far beyond anything Ethan could afford. He wasn't there to buy, just to look. Then he saw it. Sitting alone near the far edge of the property, half hidden behind weeds, a tractor. Old, rust-covered, forgotten. Its faded red paint had long since surrendered to decades of weather. One rear tire had collapsed completely. The engine compartment was coated in grime. A cracked metal plate barely revealed its manufacturer. Something about it caught Ethan's attention. Maybe because it looked abandoned. Maybe because it reminded him of himself. Shadow stopped walking. The German shepherd stared directly at the tractor. His ears rose. His body stiffened. A low sound escaped his throat. Not a growl, not quite. Something different. Ethan frowned. "What's up, buddy?" Shadow didn't move. The dog continued staring, watching, studying, for nearly 30 seconds, then finally followed Ethan again. But every few steps, he glanced back. The auction continued. Eventually, the rusted tractor came up for bidding. The crowd laughed before the auctioneer even started. "Let's see if this old girl has any friends left." More laughter. "Who'll give me $50? Silence. 20? Nothing. 10? Still nothing. Several people shook their heads. One man joked that it was worth more as lawn art. The crowd laughed again. The auctioneer sighed dramatically. $5? No response. The tractor sat alone beneath the afternoon sun, forgotten, unwanted, worthless. Something about that bothered Ethan. The auctioneer glanced around. $1? Silence. Then Ethan raised a hand. "I'll take it." The crowd erupted with amusement. Someone whistled. Another man laughed outright. The auctioneer grinned. Sold. The gavel struck. Just like that. The homeless veteran owned a rusted tractor for $1. As laughter echoed across the auction yard, Ethan simply nodded and walked toward the machine. He'd been laughed at before. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was getting it loaded. What mattered was moving forward. But as he approached the tractor, Shadow suddenly broke away from his side. The German Shepherd rushed toward the machine, then stopped directly beside it. His nose pressed against the rusted hood. He sniffed once, twice, then again. More intensely this time. The fur along his neck slowly began to rise. Ethan stared. Shadow never reacted like that. Not without reason. The dog circled the tractor. Once, twice, then stopped near the engine compartment, completely focused, completely locked in, as if something inside the machine had just spoken directly to him. And for the first time all day, Ethan felt a strange chill crawl down his spine. Because Shadow wasn't acting curious. He was acting certain. Certain that something hidden inside the rusted tractor mattered, and somehow, Ethan knew their lives were about to change. Neither of them understood why. Not yet. But the answer was waiting beneath decades of rust. Waiting beneath the hood. Waiting to be found. Waiting beneath the hood. Waiting to be found. The drive back to the abandoned farmstead took nearly an hour. The rusted tractor rattled behind Ethan's aging pickup on a borrowed trailer, its metal frame groaning with every bump in the road. Evening sunlight stretched long shadows across the Montana Valley. Golden fields rolled beneath distant mountain peaks while cottonwood trees swayed gently in the breeze. Normally, Shadow rode quietly in the passenger seat. Not today. The German Shepherd kept turning around, again and again. His amber eyes remained fixed on the tractor, watching, studying. Ethan noticed it immediately. Still thinking about that old pile of junk? Shadow's ears twitched. The dog didn't look away. Ethan frowned. That wasn't normal. Shadow had tracked fugitives, detected explosives, located wounded people hidden in rough terrain. His instincts had saved lives before, including Ethan's. The dog never obsessed over random objects. Yet whatever was inside that tractor had captured every ounce of his attention. The feeling lingered all the way back to camp. The abandoned farmstead sat alone beneath the western slopes of the Bitterroot Mountains. A collapsed barn leaned dangerously toward one side. The farmhouse had lost most of its roof years earlier. Tall grass swallowed old fence posts. Nature was slowly reclaiming everything. Ethan parked beside the camper and climbed out. The evening air smelled of pine, dry earth, and distant wood smoke. Before he could unload anything, Shadow jumped from the truck. The dog ran directly toward the trailer. Not toward his water bowl. Not toward the camper. Toward the tractor. Ethan watched silently. Shadow circled the machine once, then twice, then a third time. His nose moved constantly, searching, following scents hidden beneath decades of rust and grease. Finally, he stopped beside the hood. A low growl vibrated deep within his chest. Ethan walked over. Easy. Shadow immediately stopped growling, but remained fixed on the same spot. The dog pressed his nose against the metal, then scratched once, hard. The sound echoed across the quiet farmyard. Ethan looked closer. The hood appeared no different than the rest of the tractor. Rust, dirt, peeling paint. Nothing unusual, at least nothing visible. He shrugged. Maybe a squirrel nested in there. Shadow didn't move. The dog remained completely focused. The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains. Shadows deepened across the valley. The temperature dropped quickly. Eventually, Ethan finished unloading the tractor beside the collapsed barn. By then, darkness had settled over the farmstead. Stars emerged overhead. Thousands of them, brilliant and clear. The kind of sky only existed far away from cities. Ethan heated canned soup on the small stove inside the camper. Shadow normally waited nearby during meals. Tonight, he wasn't there. Ethan glanced through the window. The dog was still outside, still beside the tractor, still staring. For several moments, Ethan simply watched. A strange uneasiness settled in his stomach. The same feeling he'd learned to trust during his military years. Instinct. The sense that something wasn't quite right. Finally, he stepped outside. Cold air greeted him immediately. Moonlight silvered the valley. The tractor stood motionless beside the barn. Shadow sat in front of it, perfectly still, like a guard standing watch. Eating tonight, or what? The German shepherd finally turned, reluctantly, as though he hated leaving his position. Together they returned to the camper. Yet even during dinner, Shadow remained distracted. His ears constantly rotated toward the window, toward the tractor, toward whatever had captured his attention. Hours later, Ethan crawled into bed. Exhaustion pulled at him. The day had been long, the work harder than usual. Outside, wind whispered through dry grass. The camper creaked softly. Soon sleep finally arrived. For a while. Then came the barking. Ethan's eyes snapped open. His military instincts surged awake instantly. For one confused moment, he didn't know where he was. Then reality returned. Camper. Montana. Shadow. The dog barked again. Sharp. Urgent. Outside. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and sat up. The digital clock glowed. 1:17 a.m. Shadow stood near the door. Alert. Focused. Not frightened. Not aggressive. Intent. What is it? The dog barked again, then looked toward the tractor. Ethan sighed. You've got to be kidding. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The night felt cold enough to bite. Moonlight spilled across the valley. Everything appeared peaceful, silent, still. The tractor sat exactly where he'd left it. Nothing moved. No people. No animals. No danger. Shadow immediately trotted toward the machine. Ethan followed. The dog stopped beside the hood. Again. Always the hood. Shadow sniffed intensely, then scratched the metal. Once. Twice. 3 times. The sound echoed through the darkness. Ethan shined his flashlight across the engine compartment. Nothing. Just old machinery. The dog let out a frustrated whine, a sound Ethan rarely heard, almost as if Shadow was trying to communicate something, trying to explain, trying to point. Ethan crouched beside him. "What are you seeing?" The shepherd stared directly at the hood. The answer was obvious. Shadow wasn't reacting to a smell, or at least not only a smell. The dog seemed convinced something important was hidden inside, something worth finding. Eventually, Ethan returned to bed, but neither of them slept well. By dawn, Shadow was already outside again, waiting, watching. The pattern continued for 3 straight days. Each morning, the dog inspected the tractor. Each afternoon, he returned. Each evening, he sat beside it. His obsession only grew stronger. Meanwhile, Ethan tried focusing on work. Fence repairs, equipment maintenance, odd jobs around nearby ranches. But his thoughts kept returning to Shadow's behavior. The dog had never been wrong before. On the 4th day, rain clouds gathered over the mountains. Dark gray sheets drifted across the sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Ethan returned from town carrying groceries and fuel. As soon as he parked, Shadow sprinted toward him. The dog didn't greet him, didn't check the truck. Instead, he immediately ran back toward the tractor, then returned, then ran back again, as if demanding Ethan follow. Now Ethan knew something was different, very different. He grabbed a flashlight, walked toward the machine, and for the first time since buying it, he decided to inspect it properly. Rain began falling in soft drops. The tractor's rusted surfaces glistened beneath the darkening sky. Shadow stood beside the hood, waiting. Ethan opened one of the side panels. Dust poured downward. The smell of oil and old metal filled the air. He moved the flashlight slowly across the engine compartment. Years of grime coated everything. Most people would have seen nothing unusual. But Ethan wasn't most people. Years spent maintaining military vehicles had trained him to notice details, tiny details, small inconsistencies, patterns, construction methods, repair work. He leaned closer. The beam of light moved across a section near the rear of the engine bay, then stopped. Ethan froze. There, near the inner firewall, partially hidden beneath decades of grease, a weld seam, very faint, very deliberate, and very wrong. His heartbeat quickened slightly. The weld didn't belong there, not on a tractor built in the 1940s, not according to any design he'd ever seen. Shadow immediately stepped forward. The dog's tail stiffened. His eyes locked onto the exact same location. Ethan slowly reached out. His fingers traced the metal. The seam continued farther than it should. Longer, straighter, more precise. Almost as though someone had hidden another piece of metal beneath the original structure. A second wall, a concealed section, a compartment. Thunder rolled across the mountains. The rain intensified. Ethan remained frozen. Suddenly, every strange thing about Shadow's behavior made sense. The dog hadn't been obsessed with the tractor. He'd been obsessed with whatever was hidden inside it. And for the first time since the auction, Ethan felt genuine excitement. Not fear, not sadness, not regret. Curiosity, the kind he hadn't felt in years. Shadow looked up at him. The shepherd's eyes seemed almost triumphant, as if he'd finally gotten the message across. Ethan smiled despite himself. "All right, partner." He ran a hand across the hidden weld. "We're going to find out what's in there." Lightning flashed beyond the mountains. The storm rolled closer, and somewhere inside that rusted tractor, a secret that had slept for decades waited quietly in the darkness, waiting for Ethan, waiting for Shadow, waiting to finally be uncovered, waiting for Shadow, waiting to finally be uncovered. The storm arrived just after sunset. Rain hammered the roof of the camper while lightning flashed across the Bitterroot Mountains. The abandoned farmstead seemed smaller beneath the weight of the dark sky. Wind pushed against the broken walls of the old barn, making the structure groan like something alive. Inside the camper, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the weld seam. It didn't belong there. He had spent years around military vehicles, transport equipment, and field repairs. His training had taught him how to recognize modifications hidden from casual observers. That seam wasn't an accident. Someone had put it there deliberately, and someone had gone to considerable effort to hide it. Across the narrow camper, Shadow lay near the door. The German shepherd wasn't sleeping. His ears remained alert. Every few minutes he lifted his head and glanced toward the tractor outside, waiting, the same way he had been waiting for days. Finally, Ethan stood. "Let's go see what you've been trying to tell me." Shadow jumped to his feet immediately. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle by the time they reached the barn. The rusted tractor sat beneath a hanging work light Ethan had connected to a portable generator. Its faded red paint glistened beneath the yellow glow. For a moment, Ethan simply stared at it. 3 days ago, it had been worthless junk. Now it felt different, almost important. Shadow moved directly to the hidden seam. His nose touched the exact spot. Again and again. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I see it too." He gathered his tools, an angle grinder, a flashlight, a pry bar, several wrenches. The familiar weight of the equipment settled his nerves. Working with his hands always helped. It gave his mind something concrete to focus on, something real. The grinder roared to life. Sparks exploded into the darkness. Orange light danced across the barn walls. The smell of hot metal filled the air. Slowly, carefully, Ethan cut along the hidden weld line. Years of rust fought him every inch of the way. The compartment had been built to last. The more he worked, the stranger it became. The hidden panel wasn't amateur work. The welds were precise, professional, almost military in quality. Whoever built it knew exactly what they were doing. After nearly 40 minutes, the final section gave way. A dull metallic crack echoed through the barn. The hidden panel shifted, then loosened. Ethan switched off the grinder. Silence rushed back into the room. Even the rain seemed quieter now. Shadow stepped closer. The dog's body became tense, focused, ready. Ethan gripped the edge of the concealed plate and pulled. The panel came free. Behind it sat a narrow compartment roughly the size of a suitcase. For several seconds, neither man nor dog moved. Dust floated through the beam of the flashlight. The hidden space remained untouched, sealed away from the world. For decades. A strange chill ran through Ethan. It felt as though he were standing in front of a doorway into another time. Finally, he aimed the flashlight inside. Something wrapped in dark oilcloth rested within the compartment. Several bundles, perfectly preserved. His pulse quickened. Shadow sat beside him, watching. The dog seemed almost satisfied, as if his mission had finally been completed. Ethan carefully reached inside. The first bundle felt surprisingly heavy. He carried it to a nearby workbench. Rain drummed softly against the barn roof. Thunder rolled somewhere far away. The atmosphere felt almost unreal. Slowly, he unwrapped the oilcloth, layer after layer. Then he stopped. Gold. Not bars. Not coins. Certificates. Dozens of them. Old paper certificates protected inside waterproof sleeves. Their faded surfaces reflected the light. Official seals, government markings, serial numbers. Ethan stared. What in the world? The second bundle contained documents, stacks of them. Transport records, shipping manifests, military paperwork, Everything carefully organized, everything protected, everything hidden. His heartbeat accelerated. This wasn't random treasure. This was evidence. The third bundle revealed something even stranger. A photograph, black and white, edges yellowed with age. Several men stood beside a military convoy somewhere in the mountains. Behind them appeared a distinctive rock formation, a jagged peak unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. On the back of the photograph, written in faded ink, were 3 words. Hold until return. Nothing else. No names. No explanation. Just those words. Shadow suddenly stood. The dog lowered his nose toward the photograph, sniffed it once, then again. His ears rose. The image had captured his attention immediately. Ethan noticed. What is it? Shadow continued staring, the same way he had stared at the tractor, the same way he always reacted when something mattered. Ethan placed the photograph aside and opened the final bundle. A brass key rolled onto the table. Heavy, old, beautifully crafted, unlike any key he'd ever seen. Numbers had been engraved along one side. Near the handle sat a faded military insignia. His stomach tightened. This was getting stranger by the minute. He examined the transport manifests next. Most appeared ordinary at first. Dates, cargo records, locations. Then one entry caught his eye. June 1947. Military Reconstruction Convoy. Special Transfer Authorization. Restricted Routing. His eyes narrowed. Another page mentioned a convoy that had disappeared somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. No explanation followed. Only missing entries. Blank sections. Pages that seemed intentionally incomplete. The deeper Ethan looked, the more questions emerged. Nothing made sense. Why hide these documents? Why place them inside a tractor? Who built the compartment? And why had Shadow become obsessed with finding it? Outside, lightning illuminated the valley. For an instant, the barn glowed white. Then darkness returned. Ethan gathered the documents into neat piles. Military training had taught him one thing. Information mattered. Sometimes more than money. Sometimes more than weapons. Sometimes information changed everything. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Whatever this was, it was bigger than hidden treasure. Much bigger. Shadow suddenly moved toward the barn entrance. The German shepherd froze. Every muscle tightened. His ears pointed toward the darkness outside. Ethan immediately noticed. Years of working together had taught him how to read the dog. This wasn't curiosity. This was alertness. The kind Shadow displayed when something unexpected entered the area. Ethan grabbed the flashlight. Shadow? The dog didn't move. Rain continued falling beyond the doorway. The valley stretched into darkness. Empty. Silent. Yet Shadow remained fixed on something. Watching. Listening. After several moments, the tension eased. The dog relaxed slightly. Whatever had caught his attention was gone, or had never been there at all. Still, Ethan felt uneasy. He carefully rewrapped the bundles. The documents, the certificates, the photograph, the brass key. Everything went into a secure storage box inside the camper. By the time he finished, midnight had passed. The storm was moving east. Clouds drifted across the moon. The mountains stood dark and silent beyond the valley. Inside the camper, Ethan sat at the small table staring at the photograph. The convoy, the mountain, the men, the mystery. His life had been painfully simple only days earlier. Survive, work, sleep, repeat. Now an entirely different path seemed to be opening, one connected to forgotten history, missing military assets, and secrets hidden for nearly 80 years. Across from him, Shadow finally settled down. For the first time in days, the dog appeared calm. Whatever he had sensed inside the tractor was no longer hidden. He had found it. Mission accomplished. Yet as Ethan looked out the window toward the dark silhouette of the abandoned barn, a strange feeling settled over him. The discovery didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. Because somewhere beyond those mountains, someone had once gone to extraordinary lengths to hide these documents, and people rarely hide things without a reason. The rain finally stopped. The valley fell silent. Ethan picked up the brass key one last time. The metal felt cold in his hand. Ancient. Important. Waiting. Just like the tractor had been. Waiting for someone to uncover the truth. And far beyond the sleeping farmstead, hidden somewhere within the Rockies, the next piece of the mystery was already waiting for them, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. And far beyond the sleeping farmstead, hidden somewhere within the Rockies, the next piece of the mystery was already waiting for them. The following morning arrived clear and cold. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, leaving the Bitterroot Mountains standing sharp against a brilliant blue horizon. Fresh snow dusted the highest peaks. Sunlight spilled across the valley floor, turning the wet grass into fields of glittering silver. Ethan hadn't slept much. The documents occupied every corner of his mind. The certificates, the convoy records, the photograph, the brass key. Nothing about them felt ordinary. And the more he thought about them, the more one fact stood out. Someone had gone through enormous effort to hide them. People did not build secret compartments inside tractors without a reason. Shadow sat beside the camper steps, calmly chewing on a stick. For the first time in days, the dog seemed relaxed. His mission, at least for now, appeared complete. Ethan stepped outside holding the old photograph. The morning breeze stirred the edges of the faded paper. His eyes returned to the mountain visible in the background, a jagged stone formation unlike any he'd seen before, somewhere in Montana, or maybe somewhere deeper inside the Rockies. The photograph had survived nearly 80 years. Perhaps it held more answers than the documents themselves. By mid-morning, Ethan loaded the storage box into his truck. Shadow jumped into the passenger seat. Let's see if somebody in town knows what we're looking at. The drive to Darby took nearly 40 minutes. The small mountain town looked much as it always did. Quiet, unhurried, the kind of place where people still waved at strangers. Main Street stretched between old brick storefronts, a diner, a hardware store, and several businesses that looked older than Ethan himself. The town library sat near the far end of the street, a modest stone building surrounded by pine trees. Ethan parked and stepped out. Shadow followed. Inside, the scent of old books filled the air. The library was nearly empty. Only a handful of patrons moved quietly among the shelves. Behind the front desk stood a woman arranging returned books. She appeared to be in her late 30s. Dark hair, kind eyes, a calm, thoughtful expression. She looked up as Ethan approached, then immediately noticed Shadow. A faint smile crossed her face. Beautiful dog. Thanks. The woman leaned forward slightly. He military? Ethan blinked. Most people didn't recognize working dogs. She did. Retired. The woman nodded. I thought so. She extended a hand. Claire Bennett. Ethan shook it. Ethan Walker. Something about her manner felt easy, unforced. No awkward questions, no uncomfortable curiosity. Just simple kindness. Claire glanced toward the photograph in his hand. Research project? Maybe. He placed the picture on the counter. I'm hoping somebody can identify that mountain. She studied the image carefully. The smile slowly disappeared. Interest replaced it. Where did you get this? Ethan hesitated. Years of caution surfaced automatically. Then he remembered there was little point hiding the truth. At least not yet. I found it. Claire looked closer. The photograph clearly had her attention now. She motioned toward a nearby table. Let's sit down. For the next hour, they examined the image together. Claire brought out local historical maps, old survey photographs, regional records, books documenting mining operations and military infrastructure throughout western Montana. The deeper they searched, the stranger things became. Several landmarks looked similar. None matched exactly. Then Claire found something. A faded geological survey from the late 1940s. She placed it beside the photograph. Ethan immediately noticed the resemblance. The rock formation, the ridgeline, the valley below, not identical, but close, very close. Claire pointed toward a remote section of the map. These mountains sit north of the old Granite Ridge mining district. Ethan studied the location. The area appeared isolated even by Montana standards. Miles from major roads, miles from towns, miles from almost everything. What's out there? Claire frowned. Not much anymore. She paused. Used to be different. Her voice lowered slightly. There were wartime supply routes through those mountains. Ethan looked up. Wartime? Claire nodded. Mostly transportation corridors, rail spurs, storage depots, temporary logistics sites. His pulse quickened slightly. Transportation. Storage. Convoys. The pieces felt connected. Claire continued searching through archived records. Minutes later, she stopped again. This time her expression changed completely. Concern? Confusion? Something else? What is it? She slid a newspaper clipping across the table. The yellowed article carried a date. August 1947. Ethan read silently, then reread it. The article described a military convoy reported missing somewhere within the Rockies. Several vehicles, multiple personnel, a government investigation. No final conclusions. The story simply ended, as though somebody had stopped asking questions. Ethan slowly set the paper down. His stomach tightened. The date matched the convoy records hidden inside the tractor. Exactly. Claire noticed his reaction. You know something. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. For a long moment, Ethan remained silent. Then he opened the storage box. Claire's eyes widened as he revealed the documents. The brass key, the certificates, the transport manifests, the photograph. For several seconds, she simply stared, speechless. Finally, she whispered, "My God." The library seemed quieter suddenly, smaller. The weight of history sat between them on the table. Claire carefully lifted one document. Her historian's instincts immediately took over. This is authentic. She turned another page, then another. Every document deepened her shock. By the time she reached the convoy records, her hands were trembling slightly. Ethan. What? She looked directly at him. Do you understand what this is? He shook his head. Not yet. Claire exhaled slowly. Neither do I. The honesty surprised him. Most people pretended certainty. Claire didn't, but she knew enough to recognize significance. Together they continued reviewing the materials. Hours passed. The afternoon sun drifted lower outside. Then they discovered something else. A reference hidden within one of the transport manifests. A routing code. Military designation. Storage network R-17. Beside it appeared a symbol nearly identical to the one engraved on the brass key. Claire immediately began searching archived military records. Eventually, she found a brief mention. One paragraph. Buried inside an old logistics report. Storage network R-17. Temporary mountain facilities established during post-war reconstruction efforts. Most locations decommissioned by 1950. Records incomplete. Files unavailable. Unavailable. The word lingered. Ethan knew bureaucratic language when he saw it. Unavailable often meant classified, or lost, or deliberately removed. A strange pressure began building behind his eyes. Military reports. Logistics codes. Missing convoys. The terminology dragged him backward through time. Not to 1947, to his own service, to briefing rooms, operations centers, deployment orders. His breathing slowed, then tightened. The library around him seemed to fade. Claire's voice became distant. For a moment he wasn't sitting in Montana. He was somewhere else. Heat. Dust. The smell of fuel. A convoy moving through hostile terrain. Tyler Morgan laughing beside him. Then gunfire. Chaos. Smoke. The memory slammed into him without warning. Ethan gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles turned white. The room blurred. Suddenly Shadow stood. The dog pressed firmly against his leg, grounding him, anchoring him. The familiar contact cut through the rising panic. Slowly the flashback retreated. Reality returned. Bookshelves, library, Montana. Claire watched carefully. Concern filled her expression. "You okay?" Ethan nodded once. Not entirely true, but close enough. Shadow remained pressed against him, protective, steady. The dog understood long before anyone else ever did. Claire didn't ask questions, didn't push. For that, Ethan was grateful. Instead, she quietly gathered the documents. "There's more here than missing gold." Ethan looked at her. "What do you mean?" She tapped one of the records. The convoy disappeared. Then another. Several investigators died in accidents afterward. Then another. Files vanished. Her voice lowered, and somebody worked very hard to erase whatever happened. Silence settled between them. Outside, clouds drifted across the mountains. The afternoon light softened. Ethan stared at the photograph again. The convoy. The mountains. The hidden key. The missing records. A mystery buried for generations. Claire finally spoke. Whoever hid these documents wasn't hiding treasure. Ethan frowned. What were they hiding? She met his eyes. The truth. The answer lingered heavily in the quiet library. And for the first time since discovering the compartment, Ethan realized something unsettling. The documents weren't simply valuable, they were dangerous. Because somewhere, long ago, somebody had been willing to bury an entire story. And stories that powerful people wanted hidden rarely stayed buried without a fight. Because somewhere, long ago, somebody had been willing to bury an entire story. And stories that powerful people wanted hidden rarely stayed buried without a fight. The drive back to the farmstead felt different. The mountains seemed taller, the valleys deeper, the silence heavier. Ethan drove with one hand on the steering wheel while Shadow sat beside him, staring through the windshield. The documents remained locked inside a weathered storage box behind the seat. Claire's words echoed through his thoughts. The truth, not treasure, not gold. Truth. As the truck climbed a winding gravel road, late afternoon sunlight painted the hillsides gold. Deer moved through distant meadows. A hawk drifted across the sky. Everything looked peaceful. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was experience. Or maybe it was simply the realization that people had vanished over this mystery before. By the time he reached the abandoned farmstead, shadows had begun stretching across the valley. The old barn stood where it always had. The camper sat beneath a cluster of cottonwoods. Nothing appeared unusual, at first. Then Shadow growled, low, quiet, immediate. Ethan's attention sharpened. The dog was staring toward the open field beside the camper. Every muscle in his body had gone rigid. "What is it?" Shadow stepped forward. His nose worked the air. Ethan climbed out of the truck. Years of military training instantly resurfaced. Observe first, move second. The valley appeared empty. No vehicles, no people, no movement. Yet Shadow remained alert. Ethan slowly scanned the ground. Then he saw it. Tire tracks, fresh ones. The tracks cut through a muddy section near the entrance road. His truck hadn't made them. The tread pattern was different. Larger. Newer. Someone had been there recently. His heartbeat slowed. Not from fear, from focus. He followed the tracks. They led past the camper, past the old well, toward the barn, then disappeared onto harder ground. Shadow moved ahead. The dog sniffed carefully around the barn entrance. His growl deepened. The door stood exactly as Ethan had left it, locked, untouched. Still, something felt wrong, very wrong. He opened the door. The hinges creaked loudly. Dust floated through shafts of evening sunlight. The rusted tractor sat where it always had. Silent, motionless, nothing appeared disturbed. Yet Shadow continued inspecting the area. The shepherd moved around the tractor twice, then 3 times. Searching. Ethan examined the compartment. The hidden panel remained concealed. The documents were safe. Nothing appeared missing. Eventually, he stepped back. Maybe someone had simply turned around in the driveway. Maybe. But his instincts disagreed. The uneasy feeling lingered long after sunset. That evening, Ethan called Claire. The signal was weak, but the connection held. "You sound concerned," she said. "I found tire tracks." Silence filled the line. "Near the tractor?" "Near everything." Claire took a slow breath. Could be coincidence. Could be. Neither of them sounded convinced. The conversation shifted back to the documents. The convoy. The missing records. The key. Claire promised to continue researching military archives. Before hanging up, she hesitated. "Ethan." "Yeah? Be careful." The line went quiet. Darkness settled fully across the valley. Stars emerged overhead. The wind carried the scent of pine and approaching autumn. Inside the camper, Ethan reviewed the documents again. 1 page at a time. 1 detail at a time. Searching for something he might have missed. Shadow lay near the door. Alert. Always alert. Midnight arrived. Then 1 o'clock. The valley remained silent. Finally, Ethan turned off the lamp and tried to sleep. The nightmare came quickly, not because of the convoy, not because of the documents, because of Tyler. The young teammate returned again, just as he always did. Dust, gunfire, chaos, the sound of shouting, the memory replayed with brutal clarity. Ethan reaching for him, too late, always too late. Then came the explosion. The same explosion, every single time. Ethan jerked awake, breathing hard, Sweat covered his forehead. Darkness surrounded him. For a moment he couldn't separate memory from reality. Then Shadow was there. The German shepherd stood beside the bed, watching him, grounding him, anchoring him. The panic slowly faded. Ethan sat upright. His pulse finally began to settle. Then Shadow moved. Suddenly, purposefully. The dog turned toward the window. A low growl escaped his throat. Different this time. Not concern. Warning. Ethan immediately reached for the flashlight. His heart began pounding again. Shadow's eyes remained fixed outside. The growl continued. Slow, steady, dangerous. Ethan carefully moved toward the window. The valley stretched beyond the glass. Moonlight silvered the fields. The old barn stood dark against the mountains. Everything appeared normal. Then he saw it. A light, far away. Near the ridgeline overlooking the farmstead. Small, white, motionless. At first he thought it might be a star. Then it moved, briefly, just enough. Someone was there, watching. The light disappeared. Darkness swallowed the ridge once more. Ethan stared. Every nerve sharpened. He knew what he'd seen. A flashlight, binocular reflection, something, someone. The position offered a perfect view of the entire property. The camper, the barn, the tractor, everything. Shadow's growl deepened. The dog knew it too. For nearly 10 minutes, Ethan remained at the window, watching, waiting. Nothing else happened. Eventually, the valley returned to silence, yet sleep never returned. At dawn, he stepped outside. The morning air felt cold enough to sting. Mist drifted low across the fields. The ridge stood distant and quiet, almost innocent. But Ethan wasn't interested in appearances. He wanted evidence. Shadow immediately picked up a scent. The dog moved toward the northern edge of the property. Ethan followed. The trail led through wet grass toward a section of fence near the access road. There, pressed into soft earth left behind by the storm, was a footprint. Fresh. Large. Not his. Not old. Fresh. Shadow sniffed it intensely, then looked toward the mountains. The footprint faced the farmstead, facing the barn, facing the tractor. Someone had stood there, watching. The realization settled heavily in Ethan's chest. This wasn't random. The tire tracks, the light, the footprint. Somebody knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to come looking. Enough to watch from a distance. Enough to make Shadow nervous. The rest of the day passed slowly. Ethan tried focusing on routine tasks, repairing equipment, cutting firewood, organizing supplies. But his attention kept drifting. Every distant vehicle caught his eye. Every unusual sound made him pause. The valley no longer felt empty. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, he walked toward the tractor. The machine sat beneath the barn roof exactly as before. Rust, dust, silence. Yet now it seemed different. The tractor no longer felt abandoned. It felt important. Like the center of a story nobody had finished. Shadow joined him. The dog sat beside the machine, watching the horizon, watching the road, watching everything. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Ethan noticed something else. A tiny scrape mark near the tractor's side panel. Fresh metal showed beneath the rust. His stomach tightened. He crouched closer. The mark hadn't been there before. Someone had touched the tractor. Recently. Perhaps only for a moment. Perhaps only to inspect it. But someone had been close enough to leave evidence behind. Close enough to know exactly what they were looking at. The evening breeze drifted through the barn. The mountains darkened beneath the coming night. And for the first time since buying the tractor, Ethan understood something that changed everything. The secret hidden inside the machine wasn't buried in history. It was alive. Alive enough that somebody was still searching for it. Somebody willing to come onto his land. Somebody willing to watch from the shadows. Somebody who had not forgotten what happened in 1947. And somewhere beyond the mountains, whoever they were had likely just realized one very dangerous thing. The tractor had finally been opened. And somewhere beyond the mountains, whoever they were had likely just realized one very dangerous thing. The tractor had finally been opened. For the next 3 days, Ethan barely left the farmstead. The feeling of being watched refused to go away. Every morning he checked the road. Every evening he inspected the barn. Every night, Shadow made his rounds around the property before settling near the camper door. Nothing happened. No vehicles appeared. No strangers approached. No lights flashed from the ridge. Yet the silence itself felt suspicious, like a pause before something bigger. The Montana autumn deepened around them. Golden aspens covered the hillsides. Cold winds swept down from the mountains. The first hints of winter lingered in the air. On the 4th morning, Ethan drove into town to meet Claire. She was waiting at a small diner near the library. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the building. Locals filled several booths. A waitress moved between tables carrying plates of eggs and biscuits. For the first time in days, Ethan almost felt normal. Almost. Claire spread several maps across the table. Old survey records, railroad diagrams, topographic charts. Her eyes carried the exhausted look of someone who hadn't slept much. "Tell me you found something." Claire nodded. "I think Shadow found something." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Shadow?" She pulled out the faded photograph. The same one hidden inside the tractor. The image had become increasingly important with each passing day. Claire pointed toward the background. The mountain. Ethan leaned closer. "What about it?" "I finally identified it." A spark of excitement passed through him. Claire unfolded a larger map. Her finger landed on a remote section of the Rockies northwest of Darby. The location sat deep inside a region once known for mining operations. Most of the settlements had disappeared decades ago. Only ruins remained. Granite Ridge District. Ethan studied the map. The area looked isolated, extremely isolated. Exactly the kind of place people might use to hide something. Claire continued. "Remember the convoy records?" Ethan nodded. "The routes pass within 15 miles of this district." Her finger moved again. "There's more." She pulled out another document. A faded transportation report from 1948. The paper referenced an abandoned rail spur that once connected military storage depots to mining facilities throughout the mountains. One section had been highlighted. Temporary wartime logistics station. Closed in 1950. Records unavailable. The phrase appeared again. Records unavailable. The same language. The same mystery. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "What are the odds?" Claire smiled faintly. "Not very good." The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Every clue pointed toward the same region. The mountains in the photograph, the convoy routes, the rail line, the storage network. All of it converged near Granite Ridge. Finally, Ethan folded the maps. "When do we leave?" Claire laughed softly. "I was hoping you'd ask that." By noon, they were on the road. Claire followed in her SUV while Ethan drove his pickup. Shadow occupied his usual place in the passenger seat. The dog seemed unusually attentive. His ears remained forward, his eyes alert. as though he somehow understood they were moving closer to something important. The paved roads gradually disappeared. Then the gravel roads ended too. Eventually, they entered true wilderness. Towering pine forests surrounded them. Steep cliffs rose on either side. Narrow mountain roads wound through deep valleys carved by ancient glaciers. The farther they traveled, the more isolated the landscape became. Cell service vanished completely. Civilization faded behind them. Only mountains remained. Hours later, they reached the edge of the old mining district. The place looked forgotten. Collapsed structures leaned against hillsides. Rusting equipment disappeared beneath weeds and moss. Weathered signs stood barely readable. Nature had reclaimed almost everything. The sky had turned gray by the time they parked. Clouds drifted low across the peaks. Wind whispered through the trees. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence felt enormous. Shadow jumped from the truck. Immediately, the dog became focused. His nose worked constantly, following scents invisible to human senses. Claire stared around the abandoned settlement. It's like stepping into another century. Ethan agreed. The place felt frozen in time. They followed an old trail leading deeper into the valley. The route wound past collapsed cabins and forgotten machinery. Several times, Ethan compared the landscape to the photograph. The similarities became impossible to ignore. They were close, very close. Nearly an hour later, Shadow stopped. The German shepherd stood near a hillside covered in brush. His ears rose. His tail stiffened. Then he barked once. Sharp. Confident. Ethan approached. What is it? Shadow moved forward. Beyond the brush sat something almost completely hidden. Steel rails. Old railroad tracks. Claire's eyes widened. The rail spur. They began clearing away branches. More tracks appeared. Then more. The forgotten line stretched through the forest before disappearing into the mountains. Following it felt like walking through history. The rails eventually led them to a collapsed tunnel entrance. Massive stone supports framed the opening. Part of the structure had caved in decades earlier. Yet enough remained to reveal its purpose. Transportation, storage, movement, the exact things mentioned in the convoy records. Shadow suddenly pulled away from the tunnel. The dog headed uphill, fast. Ethan followed immediately. Claire struggled to keep pace. The climb became steeper, rockier, harder. Then Shadow stopped again. This time they found something even more significant. A ruined building hidden among the trees. Most of the roof had collapsed. The walls barely remained standing. Yet the structure was larger than a normal cabin. Much larger. Ethan stepped carefully inside. Dust coated everything. Broken crates littered the floor. Rusting metal shelves lined the walls. A faded military stencil remained visible on one support beam. Claire froze. This was a storage station. Her voice echoed softly. The realization settled over them. They had found one of the locations connected to the records. A place forgotten by time. A place nobody had visited in decades. Or so they thought. Shadow moved toward a corner of the building. The dog began scratching. Ethan approached. Beneath debris lay a metal container. Old, weathered, locked. The lock had long since rusted away. With a little effort, Ethan opened it. Inside rested several folders wrapped in oilcloth. For a moment, nobody breathed. The documents had survived, just like the ones hidden in the tractor. Claire carefully opened the first folder. Her eyes widened, then widened further. What is it? She handed Ethan a page. Names, dates, transactions, cargo inventories, financial records, enough information to fill an entire investigation. And one detail appeared repeatedly. Several wealthy businessmen connected to wartime contracts. The same names surfaced again and again. Transport authorizations, special exemptions, missing cargo reports, erased inventories. The pattern became obvious. Someone had diverted government assets. Someone powerful. Someone connected. And then they had buried the evidence. Claire turned another page, then another. The deeper they looked, the larger the story became. This wasn't a single theft. It was a network, an operation, a conspiracy hidden beneath decades of silence. The wind howled outside. Clouds darkened overhead. The mountains seemed to close around them. Ethan stared at the records. A strange realization formed. The mystery wasn't shrinking. It was growing. Every answer created 3 new questions. Every discovery exposed something larger. Somewhere deep inside the Rockies, a convoy had disappeared. A storage network had been erased. Evidence had been hidden, and powerful men had apparently profited from all of it. Shadow sat quietly beside the open container, watching, waiting. The dog who had discovered the tractor's secret had now uncovered another piece of the puzzle. And judging by the amount of evidence scattered through the abandoned station, they were still nowhere near the end. Because hidden among the final pages of one folder was a handwritten note. Just 7 words. 7 words that changed everything. Transfer completed. Witness remains unaccounted for. Ethan slowly lowered the paper. The valley suddenly felt colder. Because if there had been a witness, then somewhere out there, a family might still be waiting for the truth. Because if there had been a witness, then somewhere out there, a family might still be waiting for the truth. The drive back from the abandoned storage station felt quieter than any journey Ethan could remember. The mountains rolled past outside his window, their peaks glowing beneath the fading afternoon sun. Golden aspens shimmered along the slopes. Long shadows stretched across valleys that seemed untouched by time. Yet neither Ethan nor Claire spoke much. The discovery in the mountains had changed everything. Before, they had been chasing a mystery. Now they had evidence. Real evidence. Names, records, transactions, and a witness who had somehow disappeared from history. Shadow rested in the passenger seat. Unlike the humans, the German Shepherd appeared completely content. His mission remained simple. Find, protect, stay beside Ethan. The dog had no interest in conspiracies, no concern for secrets, only loyalty. Sometimes Ethan envied that simplicity. The following morning, Claire arrived at the farmstead carrying several folders. The autumn sky hung low and gray above the valley. A cold wind swept across the fields. Ethan stepped out of the camper holding a cup of coffee. Claire looked excited. The first genuine excitement Ethan had seen from her since all of this began. I found the witness. Ethan nearly spilled his coffee. What? Claire held up one folder. I think I found him. Minutes later, they sat inside the camper reviewing documents spread across the small table. Shadow slept nearby. Claire pointed to one name repeated throughout the recovered records. Samuel Lawson. Transportation Supervisor. Convoy Liaison. Present during final transfer. Potential witness. The same name appeared again in several military communications, then suddenly disappeared. No explanation. No follow-up. Nothing. Like someone had erased him. Claire opened another file. This took hours. Inside were old census records, property records, death certificates, family registries. Eventually, the trail led to a single surviving relative. Margaret Lawson. Age 83. Living alone near Flathead Lake, nearly 4 hours north. Ethan studied the photograph attached to the file. an elderly woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. What happened to her father? Claire sighed. According to local records, he was accused of stealing government property after the convoy disappeared. Ethan frowned. But he was the witness. Exactly. The realization settled heavily between them. Someone had needed a scapegoat. Someone had needed blame. And Samuel Lawson had been convenient. The rest of the story emerged piece by piece. Samuel lost everything: his reputation, his job, his future. Then he vanished. Officially, he disappeared. Unofficially, nobody knew. Margaret had spent her entire life carrying the consequences. The emotional weight of that fact lingered long after Claire finished speaking. Finally, Ethan stood. "We need to talk to her." Claire nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that." By noon, they were on the road again. Montana unfolded around them in sweeping cinematic beauty. Massive mountain ranges, crystal rivers, open ranch land, golden forests. The farther north they traveled, the more remote the landscape became. Flathead Lake finally appeared in the late afternoon. The water stretched toward the horizon like polished glass. Snow-capped mountains rose beyond it. The scene looked almost unreal. Margaret Lawson's cabin sat alone near the shoreline. A narrow dirt road led through towering pines. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney. Everything about the place felt peaceful, timeless, the kind of home built by people who expected to stay forever. As Ethan parked, Shadow immediately became alert. Not defensive, interested. The dog seemed to sense something important. Margaret answered the door herself. She moved slowly, but carried herself with quiet dignity. Her face showed the passage of many decades, yet her eyes remained sharp, intelligent, observant. She studied Ethan first, then Claire, then Shadow. A faint smile appeared. "Well." Her voice carried warmth. "Anyone who brings a dog that handsome can't be all bad." The tension eased slightly. Shadow immediately walked forward. The old woman crouched carefully and scratched behind his ears. The shepherd leaned into her hand. Approval granted. Ethan couldn't help smiling. Inside, the cabin felt warm and welcoming. Family photographs lined the walls. Old books filled wooden shelves. The scent of cedar and coffee hung in the air. For a while, they simply talked. About Montana. About weather. About life. Then Claire carefully brought up Samuel Lawson. The change in Margaret was immediate. Her smile disappeared. A sadness decades old settled across her face. "My father." The words emerged quietly. Ethan placed the recovered photograph on the table. Margaret froze. Her hands began trembling. Slowly, she reached for the image. For a long moment, she simply stared. The room became silent. Completely silent. Finally, tears appeared in her eyes. "I've never seen this picture." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Ethan and Claire exchanged a glance. Neither interrupted. Margaret continued studying the photograph. Then she noticed one figure standing near the convoy. Her breath caught. "Oh my God." The old woman covered her mouth. "That's him." A lifetime of emotions flooded into the room: hope, pain, memory, loss. The years seemed to fall away from her face. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Ethan carefully revealed the documents. The convoy records. The witness reports. The recovered evidence. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. Samuel Lawson had not been a thief. He had not stolen government property. He had not betrayed anyone. The records suggested exactly the opposite. He had witnessed something. Something important enough that others needed him silenced. Margaret listened without moving. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks now. Decades of unanswered questions suddenly had answers. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to change everything. My whole life. Her voice cracked. My whole life people looked at my family differently. Ethan remained silent. The pain in her words needed no response. My mother died believing he was guilty. She looked toward the lake beyond the window. We lost friends. Her eyes closed briefly. We lost everything. The room felt heavy with grief. Not fresh grief. Old grief. The kind that settled into families for generations. Then something remarkable happened. Margaret smiled. A small smile. But real. For the first time since they arrived. He wasn't what they said. Ethan shook his head. No. The old woman nodded slowly. I always knew. More tears appeared. This time different. Not sorrow. Relief. The distinction mattered. Shadow quietly moved beside her chair. Without hesitation, Margaret rested a hand on his head. The shepherd remained perfectly still, comforting, present, steady, as he always was. The moment felt almost sacred. By evening, they sat together watching the sun sink behind Flathead Lake. Golden light reflected across the water. The mountains glowed orange and crimson. A perfect Montana sunset. Margaret finally turned toward Ethan. You know, she smiled gently. I spent 50 years waiting for somebody to tell me who my father really was. Ethan looked toward the lake. The answer came quietly. Looks like he was a good man. Margaret nodded. The tears returned, but she wasn't crying from pain anymore. She was crying because the truth had finally come home. The drive back began after dark. Claire followed behind in her SUV. Shadow slept peacefully beside Ethan. The shepherd seemed exhausted after another day of discoveries. For a while, Ethan simply drove beneath a sky full of stars. The road wound through forests and mountain passes. Everything felt strangely calm, meaningful. For the first time since finding the tractor, Ethan felt something beyond curiosity. Purpose. The mystery was no longer about hidden gold, or missing records, or secret compartments. Real people had suffered because of what happened. Real families. Real lives. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were finally beginning to set part of it right. But far behind them, hidden somewhere in the darkness beyond the highway, another vehicle had appeared. Its headlights remained distant. Never approaching. Never passing. Only watching. Following. And neither Ethan nor Claire noticed. Not yet. And neither Ethan nor Claire noticed. Not yet. The vehicle remained several hundred yards behind them, far enough to avoid suspicion, close enough to maintain visual contact. Its headlights occasionally appeared around distant curves before disappearing again into the darkness of the Montana wilderness. The road wound south through forests and mountain valleys. Stars glittered above the peaks. The world looked peaceful. But somewhere in that darkness, someone was watching. The following week passed in a blur of research and preparation. Claire continued studying the recovered documents. Ethan focused on organizing the evidence. The files from the hidden storage station filled several boxes now. Every day uncovered new connections, new names, new transactions, new proof that someone had manipulated government assets after the war. The conspiracy stretched farther than either of them had imagined. And yet one mystery remained unsolved. The brass key. Despite all their discoveries, they still had no idea what it opened. One cold October morning, Claire arrived at the farmstead, carrying a weathered folder. Snow dusted the mountains behind her. Winter was coming fast. I found something. Ethan stepped out of the camper. Shadow immediately greeted Claire. The German Shepherd had grown fond of her, perhaps because she treated him like a partner rather than a pet. Claire spread several papers across a folding table. One document stood out immediately. A railway maintenance diagram. Her finger tapped a symbol. The exact same symbol engraved on the brass key. Ethan leaned closer. What is this? A maintenance access system. Claire pointed toward a remote section of the map. Connected to an old mountain rail corridor. The location sat deep inside the Rockies, far beyond the abandoned mining district, far beyond any modern transportation routes. Another forgotten place, another secret hidden in the wilderness. The pattern was becoming familiar. 3 days later, they left before dawn. Heavy clouds hung low over the mountains. The air smelled of snow. This time the journey was longer, harder. The roads gradually disappeared beneath increasing elevation. Eventually, even the truck could go no farther. They continued on foot. Shadow led the way. The German Shepherd moved confidently through the forest. Pine trees towered overhead. The ground became steeper. Snow began falling shortly after noon. At first, only a few flakes, then more. The landscape slowly transformed into a world of white and gray. Claire pulled her jacket tighter. Remind me why every clue is buried in the middle of nowhere? Ethan smiled faintly. Probably because hiding things in cities doesn't work very well. The answer earned a laugh. A small moment of normalcy. One they would both remember later. By mid-afternoon, they reached a narrow mountain pass. The view beyond was breathtaking. Snow-covered ridges stretched toward the horizon. Frozen streams wound through valleys below. Clouds drifted between the peaks. The Rockies looked endless, ancient, untouched. Shadow suddenly stopped. The dog froze. Every muscle became rigid. Ethan recognized the change instantly. Alert. Danger. The German Shepherd slowly turned toward a distant ridgeline. A low growl escaped his throat. Ethan's smile vanished. What is it? Shadow continued staring. The wind carried snow through the pass. Visibility had begun to decrease. For several moments, Ethan saw nothing. Then movement. A figure. Far away. Almost hidden among the trees. Then another. The shapes disappeared before he could get a clear look. Claire noticed his expression. What happened? I think we're not alone. The words settled heavily between them. The weather worsened rapidly. Snow fell harder. The trail became difficult to follow. The group continued moving. Faster now. The feeling of being watched had returned. Stronger than ever. An hour later, they entered a dense forest below the ridgeline. The trees offered some protection from the storm, but the sense of danger remained. Shadow suddenly barked, sharp, urgent. The dog spun toward the rear trail. Ethan reacted immediately. Years of military training surged back to life. Observation, assessment, movement. 3 figures emerged between the trees, still distant. Faces hidden beneath winter clothing. Their intentions impossible to determine. Yet something about their behavior felt wrong. They weren't hikers. They weren't hunters. They weren't lost. They were following. The realization came instantly. Someone had tracked them. Someone knew where they were going. Ethan? Claire's voice carried concern now. We need to move. The storm intensified. Snow swirled through the forest. Visibility dropped further. The terrain became difficult and dangerous. Perfect conditions for losing pursuers. Or getting lost yourself. The group moved downhill through dense timber. Branches scraped against jackets. Ice covered portions of the trail. The forest seemed endless. Behind them, the distant figures continued appearing and disappearing through the snowfall. Never close, never far. Always there, the chase continued for nearly an hour. Then disaster struck. Claire slipped on an icy slope. She fell hard. Pain flashed across her face. Ethan helped her up immediately. "You okay?" "I think so." But she wasn't moving normally. Her ankle had been injured. Not severely, but enough to slow them down, enough to create a problem. The storm had become a full blizzard now. Snow filled the air. The world vanished beyond 100 feet. The mountain transformed into a maze of white. Shadow suddenly charged forward. The dog disappeared briefly between the trees, then barking erupted, aggressive, protective. Ethan's heart dropped. "Shadow!" The German shepherd's barking intensified. Ethan rushed toward the sound. Claire followed as quickly as possible. The scene appeared through swirling snow. One of the unknown men had approached closer than the others, not attacking, not threatening, simply moving toward them, but Shadow had intercepted him. The German shepherd stood between the stranger and his people. Fur raised, teeth exposed, fearless. The man immediately backed away, hands visible, trying to create distance. The storm made everything chaotic, confusing. The man retreated. Shadow held his ground. Then suddenly, the dog yelped. A sharp, painful sound. Ethan froze. His stomach turned to ice. Shadow stumbled, not from any confrontation. A broken tree branch, weakened by snow and wind, had crashed down during the storm. Part of it struck the dog as it fell. The impact wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious. The German shepherd struggled to put weight on one front leg. "Ethan!" Claire's voice sounded distant. All Ethan saw was Shadow, the dog who had stood beside him through every nightmare, every hardship, every lonely day, now injured, because he had been protecting them. Ethan dropped to his knees. Snow collected on his jacket. His hands carefully examined the injury. Shadow remained remarkably calm despite the pain. The shepherd trusted him completely. That trust hit Ethan harder than the storm. For a moment, memories flooded back. Teammates, injuries, people he couldn't save. The old guilt surged forward. Not again, not Shadow, never Shadow. The blizzard howled around them. The unknown figures had vanished, swallowed by the storm, no longer important. Only Shadow mattered now. "We're getting out of here." Ethan carefully lifted the dog. Shadow weighed nearly 90 pounds, normally manageable. Under blizzard conditions and mountain terrain, it became exhausting. But Ethan never hesitated, not once. The storm raged into evening. Visibility disappeared completely. Every step became a struggle. Claire supported where she could despite her injured ankle. Together, they searched for shelter. Darkness approached rapidly. The temperature dropped. The mountains became dangerous. Then, through the swirling snow, Ethan spotted something. A structure. Small, weathered, half buried beneath drifts. An abandoned ranger cabin. Hope surged through him. They pushed forward. The door resisted at first, then opened. Inside, the cabin was cold but intact. Protection, safety, shelter. At last. Ethan carried Shadow inside and gently laid him near the old stone fireplace. The dog looked exhausted, but alive. Thank God. Outside, the blizzard continued hammering the mountains. Inside, silence settled over the tiny cabin, broken only by the wind and Ethan's breathing. As he sat beside Shadow, one hand resting on the dog's thick fur, a painful realization settled deep inside his chest. The mystery had become dangerous, far more dangerous than either of them had understood. And tonight, in a lonely cabin buried beneath a mountain storm, The only thing Ethan cared about was whether his best friend would survive until morning. Far more dangerous than either of them had understood. And tonight, in a lonely cabin buried beneath a mountain storm, the only thing Ethan cared about was whether his best friend would survive until morning. The wind screamed against the walls of the ranger cabin. Snow slammed into the windows. The entire structure groaned beneath the weight of the storm. Outside, the Rocky Mountains had vanished into a world of white. Inside, a single lantern cast a warm circle of light across the rough wooden floor. Ethan knelt beside Shadow. The German shepherd lay on a blanket near the stone fireplace. His breathing remained steady. That alone brought some comfort. But the injury worried Ethan. The fallen branch had struck Shadow's front shoulder and leg hard enough to leave him limping badly. Nothing appeared broken, at least not obviously. Still, the dog was in pain, and seeing Shadow hurt affected Ethan more than he cared to admit. Claire sat nearby, carefully wrapping her injured ankle. Neither spoke much. The silence inside the cabin felt heavy. Exhaustion had finally caught up with both of them. The day had been long, too long. Yet sleep remained impossible. Not while Shadow lay injured. Not while unknown people seemed determined to follow them. Not while the mystery continued growing larger. Ethan gently ran a hand through the dog's thick fur. Shadow opened his eyes. His tail tapped weakly against the floor. Even injured, the shepherd's first concern seemed to be reassuring Ethan. The simple loyalty nearly broke his heart. "You always do that." Shadow blinked. "You always make sure I'm okay." The dog rested his head against Ethan's knee. The gesture was small, but it carried years of history, years of trust, years of friendship. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the mountains. The storm showed no signs of weakening. Claire watched quietly, then finally spoke. "He loves you." Ethan nodded. "I know." Claire smiled faintly. Most people spend their whole lives looking for that kind of loyalty. The words lingered in the air. For a moment, neither spoke again. The lantern flickered. Wind rattled the cabin windows. The night deepened. Eventually, Claire drifted into an uneasy sleep beneath several blankets. Ethan remained awake. Shadow remained awake too. The two sat together near the fireplace while snow continued piling against the cabin walls. Hours passed. The storm became background noise. The darkness settled deeper. And eventually, Ethan's thoughts drifted somewhere he usually avoided. The past. His gaze fixed on the dancing lantern light. The memories came slowly at first. Then, all at once, a desert road, military vehicles, dust clouds stretching across the horizon, young men laughing between missions, Tyler Morgan among them, always smiling, always optimistic. Even when nobody else was. The memory felt vivid, painfully vivid. Tyler sitting beside him before a deployment, talking about home, talking about family, talking about plans. Plans he never got the chance to see. Ethan closed his eyes. The guilt returned immediately. The familiar weight. The same weight he'd carried for years. Why him? Why Tyler? Why some people survive while others don't? Questions with no answers. Questions that never stopped. Shadow shifted beside him. The dog pressed closer, as though sensing exactly where Ethan's mind had wandered. The gesture pulled Ethan back into the present, back to the cabin, back to Montana, back to the friend who still sat beside him. For several moments, Ethan stared into the lantern flame. Then he spoke. Not to Claire, not to himself, to Shadow. "There's something I never told anybody." The dog watched him quietly. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, the cabin remained still. Ethan took a slow breath. "When Tyler died, His voice faltered. The words rarely left his mouth. Almost never. I was supposed to be with him. The confession hung in the air. Raw, honest, painful. Ethan looked toward the storm-darkened window. I made a different call. He swallowed hard. I changed positions. The memory surfaced with brutal clarity. Orders, routes, timing, small decisions. The kind made every day during operations. Most meant nothing. One changed everything. If I hadn't switched assignments... His voice broke slightly. The sentence remained unfinished. It didn't need finishing. Shadow slowly lifted his head. The dog placed one paw across Ethan's boot. Simple, quiet, yet somehow powerful. Ethan laughed softly through the emotion. You always know, don't you? The shepherd's eyes never left him. The answer seemed obvious. Maybe dogs didn't understand words, but they understood people. They understood pain, and Shadow understood Ethan better than anyone ever had. The storm raged on, yet something inside Ethan felt different now. Lighter, not healed, not fixed, but lighter. The burden he'd carried alone for so long had finally been spoken aloud, even if only to a dog. Especially to a dog. Hours later, Ethan carefully checked Shadow's shoulder again. The swelling had stabilized. The dog even managed to stand briefly. A good sign. A very good sign. Relief washed through him. Perhaps for the first time all night. You scared me, partner. Shadow leaned into him. The simple movement nearly brought tears to Ethan's eyes, because the truth was impossible to ignore. The mystery no longer mattered as much. Not tonight. The convoy, the gold, the hidden records, the conspiracy. All of it could wait. The only thing that mattered was the dog, the friend who had stood beside him through homelessness, nightmares, loss, loneliness. Everything. Outside, the blizzard finally began weakening. The winds eased slightly. Snowfall became lighter. A faint gray glow appeared beyond the windows. Morning approached. Claire stirred awake. The first thing she noticed was Shadow standing. The second was Ethan smiling. A genuine smile. One she hadn't seen before. He's doing better? Ethan nodded. Yeah. Relief immediately crossed her face. The entire atmosphere inside the cabin changed. Hope returned. Not fully, but enough. The longest night of the journey had finally ended. As daylight slowly illuminated the mountains outside, Ethan opened the cabin door. Cold air rushed inside. The storm had transformed everything. Snow blanketed the landscape. Pine trees bent beneath heavy white layers. The world looked untouched, clean, silent. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there, watching the sunrise spill across the Rockies. Golden light painted the snow-covered peaks. The beauty felt almost unreal. Then Shadow appeared beside him. The German shepherd stood carefully on his injured leg, still sore, still healing, but standing, alive, strong, present. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's neck. Neither spoke, neither needed to. Together they watched the sunrise. A new day, a new chance. And somewhere beyond those mountains, hidden beneath decades of lies and forgotten history, the next piece of the truth still waited. Waiting for Ethan. Waiting for Claire. Waiting for the brass key. Because despite everything that had happened, one fact remained unchanged. They still hadn't discovered what the key unlocked. And deep within the Rockies, something was waiting behind a locked door. They still hadn't discovered what the key unlocked. And deep within the Rockies, something was waiting behind a locked door. 3 days after the blizzard, the mountains finally released their grip on winter. The skies cleared, roads reopened, and Shadow was strong enough to travel again. The German Shepherd still carried a slight limp, but every day he grew stronger. The swelling in his shoulder had gone down significantly. The veterinarian in Derby had confirmed what Ethan hoped to hear. No broken bones, no permanent damage, just time and rest. The news felt like a gift. For the first time since the accident, Ethan slept through an entire night without waking to check on Shadow. Now they were heading back into the mountains, back toward the mystery, back toward the brass key. The morning sun illuminated fresh snow on the peaks as Ethan drove the truck up a winding mountain road. Claire followed behind. The recovered documents sat locked inside secure cases. Months earlier, Ethan would never have imagined himself becoming the caretaker of a 70-year-old conspiracy. Life had strange ways of changing direction, especially when a dog decided to scratch at the hood of a rusty tractor. By noon, they reached the region identified in the railway maintenance records. The location looked abandoned, forgotten. A narrow valley sat between steep mountain walls. Old railroad tracks emerged from the snow before disappearing again beneath brush and rock slides. Nothing moved. Nothing lived there anymore. Or so it appeared. Shadow jumped from the truck. Immediately his ears rose. His nose worked the cold air. The dog seemed energized, focused, the same way he had behaved near the tractor. Claire noticed it too. He's got that look again. Ethan smiled. Yeah, Shadow began walking. Not randomly, purposefully, following something. The trail led past a collapsed signal tower, then along an overgrown section of track, then toward a weathered maintenance building partially hidden by pine trees. The structure looked ordinary, almost disappointing. A simple railroad service station, wooden walls, stone foundation, broken windows, nothing remarkable. At first. Then Ethan noticed the symbol, faded, barely visible, carved into a steel maintenance hatch beside the building, the exact same symbol engraved on the brass key. His pulse quickened. Claire stared. That's it. For several moments, nobody moved. The years seemed to disappear. The decades folded back. Suddenly, the mystery wasn't distant history anymore. It was right in front of them. Ethan pulled the brass key from his jacket pocket. The metal felt cold in his hand. Heavy. Important. The hatch sat partially hidden beneath weeds and snow. Together they cleared the debris. A rusted lock emerged, still intact, still waiting, for nearly 80 years. Ethan inserted the key. The fit was perfect. The sound echoed softly through the valley. A metallic click. Then silence. Nobody spoke. The moment felt too important, too strange. Slowly, Ethan turned the handle. The hatch opened. Cold air rushed upward from below. A staircase descended into darkness. Claire exhaled quietly. My God. Ethan switched on a flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness. Concrete walls, steel railings, military construction. The staircase continued deeper than expected. Far deeper. Shadow moved first. The German Shepherd carefully descended the steps. Ethan followed. Claire came behind. The temperature dropped with every level. The air smelled old, dry, preserved, like a place untouched by time. The staircase finally ended at a reinforced steel door. The same symbol appeared again. Beneath it sat faded lettering. Storage Network R-17, authorized access only. Claire stared. This was real. Ethan nodded. The convoy, the records, the witness, everything, real. The door stood slightly open. Just enough. as though someone had once intended to return, and never did. Ethan pushed it wider. The hinges groaned softly. Then the room beyond revealed itself. Silence filled the underground vault. Rows of steel shelving stretched into darkness. Wooden crates lined the walls. Dust covered everything. Nothing had been touched for decades. The flashlights swept across the room. Gold bars. There were some. Not mountains of them. Not enough to make anyone unimaginably rich, but enough to prove the documents were telling the truth. Yet the gold wasn't what captured their attention. It was everything else. Boxes, thousands of pages, filing cabinets, records, correspondence, ledgers, contracts, shipping manifests, evidence, an entire hidden archive. Claire stood frozen. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "This is it." Ethan slowly walked forward. The magnitude became overwhelming. Every shelf contained another piece of history, another secret, another record somebody had tried to erase. The truth had been hidden here all along. Not treasure, truth. The realization struck harder than any gold ever could. For decades, people had chased rumors of stolen wartime fortunes, missing shipments, lost wealth, buried riches. But the real fortune wasn't measured in gold. It was measured in evidence. Evidence capable of exposing everything. The conspiracy, the thefts, the cover-up, the names, the lies. Claire opened one of the filing cabinets. Her eyes widened immediately. "Ethan." He turned. She held up a folder. Inside were signed agreements, corporate records, financial transfers. The names matched the ones found in the mountain storage station. Only now the scale was clear. The conspiracy had reached across states, across industries, across generations. Several families had built enormous fortunes from diverted government assets. Entire businesses, entire careers, entire legacies, built on theft, built on silence, built on buried truth. Shadow moved through the vault slowly. The dog occasionally sniffed at boxes before continuing. His work seemed finished now. The secret hidden inside the tractor had led them here, exactly here. To the final archive, the final proof. Hours passed as they documented everything. Photographs, digital scans, copies. The deeper they searched, the more astonishing the discovery became. No wonder someone had followed them. No wonder people had watched the farmstead. No wonder somebody had hidden the records for nearly 80 years. This wasn't merely history. It was accountability. Near the back of the vault, Ethan found one final box, smaller than the others, personal. Inside sat a collection of letters. Among them was one signed by Samuel Lawson, the witness, the man whose family had suffered for decades. His final letter described everything: the theft, the cover-up, the names involved, his attempts to expose the truth, and one heartbreaking line near the end. "If this reaches my daughter someday, tell her I never stopped trying to come home." The words hit Ethan like a punch. For a long moment, he simply stared. Claire wiped tears from her eyes. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The room itself seemed to carry the weight of generations. Outside, afternoon sunlight touched the mountains. Inside, forgotten voices finally spoke again. And for the first time since buying a rusted tractor for $1, Ethan understood what Shadow had truly found. Not a treasure, not a fortune. A chance to restore the truth. A chance to give names back to the forgotten. A chance to finish a story that should have ended decades ago. Yet as they packed the evidence and prepared to leave, neither noticed something happening far above the valley. A vehicle had stopped near the entrance road. Then another, and another. Because while Ethan and Claire had finally found the vault, Someone else had just realized they found it too. Because while Ethan and Claire had finally found the vault, someone else had just realized they found it too. The first sign came from Shadow. The German shepherd stopped moving, stopped sniffing, stopped exploring. His ears rose sharply. His entire body became rigid, alert, focused, danger. Ethan immediately recognized the posture. Years of working together had taught him to trust the dog before trusting his own instincts. "What is it, partner?" Shadow stared toward the staircase leading out of the underground vault. A low growl rolled from deep inside his chest. Claire looked up from a stack of documents. "What happened?" Ethan switched off his flashlight. The vault suddenly became darker, quieter, more serious. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then a faint sound drifted down from above, a vehicle door closing. Distant, but unmistakable. Claire's face paled. "They found us." The words hung in the air. Neither needed confirmation. The evidence was too valuable. The timing too perfect. The mystery too dangerous. Someone had followed the trail. Someone had finally caught up. Ethan's military instincts surfaced immediately. Calm, methodical, focused. The panic that might have overwhelmed someone else never arrived. Years of training took over. "How many copies do we have?" Claire looked at her laptop. "Everything important is backed up. Multiple drives?" She nodded. 3. Good. Very good. The truth could survive now, even if the evidence in the vault disappeared. The silence above continued. Then another sound. Footsteps. Not rushing, not sneaking. Deliberate, confident. Whoever had arrived believed they were in control. That assumption would become their first mistake. Ethan gathered the most important files. Samuel Lawson's letter, financial records, the original transfer manifests. Enough evidence to expose everything. Shadow remained focused on the staircase. The dog never barked, never moved, only watched. The same way he had watched the tractor. The same way he had watched the ridgeline above the farmstead. Claire quietly secured the digital backups. For a brief moment, Ethan looked around the vault. The hidden archive. The forgotten truth. The secret buried beneath decades of lies. They had found it. Now they had to protect it. The footsteps stopped. A voice echoed faintly from above. Not threatening, not aggressive, almost professional. "Mr. Walker." Ethan's jaw tightened. The stranger knew his name. The voice continued. "We'd like to speak with you." Silence followed. Ethan exchanged a glance with Claire. Neither responded. The voice returned. "You've uncovered something very important. Still calm, still controlled, as have many people before you." That sentence caught Ethan's attention. Many people before you. The implication felt deliberate, calculated. Another pause. Then the stranger spoke again. "This doesn't need to become complicated." Ethan almost laughed. The situation had been complicated for nearly 80 years. The footsteps retreated slightly, perhaps realizing they weren't getting an answer. Shadow's growl faded. The dog seemed less concerned now, which told Ethan something important. The people above weren't an immediate threat, at least not yet. Eventually, Ethan made a decision. The truth was finally strong enough to survive. They no longer needed to hide, not if they acted quickly. He turned to Claire. "Time to finish this." The next 48 hours unfolded faster than either expected. Federal investigators received complete copies of the recovered evidence, historical records, financial transfers, military documents, witness statements, everything. Every piece, every page, every name. The process began quietly, then exploded. Investigators who initially dismissed the evidence quickly changed their minds. The documentation was overwhelming, authentic, detailed, impossible to ignore. The story buried since 1947 finally surfaced. And once it surfaced, it spread quickly. Entire departments became involved. Historical investigators, financial auditors, government archivists. The truth had reached too many people to disappear again. Meanwhile, the individuals connected to the original conspiracy found themselves facing a problem. The evidence existed. Multiple copies existed. Too many copies, too many witnesses, too many records. The secret was no longer controllable. One evening, Ethan sat outside his camper watching the sunset. The Bitterroot Mountains glowed orange beneath the fading light. For the first time in weeks, the valley felt peaceful. Shadow rested beside him. His injured shoulder had nearly healed. The shepherd looked stronger every day. Claire arrived shortly before dark. A smile spread across her face before she even stepped from the vehicle. That alone told Ethan everything. It's happening. She carried a folder. Inside sat official notices, investigations, recovery proceedings, historical reviews. Everything had begun moving forward. The years of silence were ending. The names hidden inside the vault were finally being examined. The records finally mattered. The victims finally mattered. Samuel Lawson finally mattered. Claire sat beside Ethan. For a long moment they watched the mountains together. The sky slowly darkened. Stars emerged one by one. Then Claire spoke quietly. Margaret called. Ethan smiled. "How is she?" "Told me she cried for an hour." The answer carried no sadness, only relief. Claire looked toward the horizon. She said it's the first time in her life she feels like her father came home. Neither spoke after that. The statement deserved silence. The good kind, the meaningful kind. Across the valley, wind moved through the grass. The same valley where Ethan had arrived homeless, invisible, forgotten. Now everything felt different. Not because of money, not because of treasure, because of purpose. The realization settled deeply inside him. For years he'd been running from ghosts. Now he'd helped give peace to someone else's. Days later, confirmation arrived. The investigations had validated the records, the hidden assets, the wartime diversions, the cover-up, everything. The official findings would take months to complete, possibly years, but the outcome was already clear. The truth had survived. The truth had won. One afternoon, Ethan walked to the barn where the rusted tractor still sat. The machine looked exactly as it had on auction day. Rust, age, silence. Yet now it felt almost sacred, a forgotten object that had carried history inside its heart. Shadow joined him. The dog sat beside the tractor, just as he had on the first night, watching, waiting. Ethan smiled. "You knew, didn't you?" Shadow tilted his head. The shepherd's expression remained wonderfully unreadable. Maybe he had known. Maybe he had simply followed a scent. Either way, none of this would have happened without him. A gust of wind swept through the barn. Sunlight spilled across the old machine. The moment felt strangely complete. Yet life wasn't finished surprising them, because less than a week later, an official letter arrived. A letter that would change Ethan's future forever, and finally bring this extraordinary journey to its last chapter. A letter that would change Ethan's future forever, and finally bring this extraordinary journey to its last chapter. The envelope arrived on a clear spring morning. The snow had finally retreated from the Bitterroot Valley. Fresh green grass covered the hillsides. Wildflowers had begun appearing along fence lines. For the first time in months, the world felt alive again. Ethan stood outside the camper when the mail truck disappeared down the road. Shadow trotted beside him. The German shepherd looked almost completely recovered now. His limp had faded. His strength had returned. Only a small scar beneath his thick fur remained as a reminder of the mountain storm. Ethan opened the envelope, then read it once, then twice, then a third time. For several seconds he simply stared at the page, unable to believe it. Shadow sat patiently beside him, waiting. The dog had always been good at waiting. Finally, Ethan laughed. Not the tired laugh of survival, not the nervous laugh of uncertainty. A genuine laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep inside. The letter contained the official resolution, the recovery award. Compensation authorized through multiple historical recovery programs and federal settlements connected to the recovered assets. The amount was enough to change a life, enough to buy stability, enough to buy peace, enough to buy a future. For the first time in years, Ethan no longer had to wonder where he would sleep next month, or next year. The realization felt almost overwhelming. He sat on the camper steps. The mountains stood brilliant beneath the morning sun, and for a long time, he simply looked at them, thinking, remembering, grateful. Several weeks later, Ethan Walker became the owner of a small ranch nestled against the foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains. It wasn't enormous. It wasn't extravagant. It was simply beautiful. Rolling pastures, a modest farmhouse, a red barn, a clear mountain stream running along one edge of the property. The kind of place he'd dreamed about during difficult nights. The kind of place that felt like home. The day he received the keys, Shadow ran across the open pasture like a puppy. The shepherd charged through tall grass, splashed through the stream, then raced back toward Ethan. Pure joy, pure freedom. Ethan smiled. I think you approve. Shadow barked once. The answer seemed obvious. Claire visited often. Their friendship had grown naturally over the months, built through trust, shared challenges, and a mystery neither would ever forget. Margaret Lawson visited too. The elderly woman insisted on bringing homemade pies every few weeks. She often sat on the porch overlooking the valley, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying quietly, but always at peace, because her father's name had finally been restored. The truth had finally come home. Summer arrived. The ranch flourished. And eventually, another special delivery arrived. The rusted tractor. The same tractor Ethan had purchased for $1. The machine looked smaller now, less mysterious, yet somehow more important. Government historians had completed their work. The tractor had been officially recognized as a historical artifact connected to the recovery effort. Permission had been granted for Ethan to keep it. He knew exactly where it belonged. A stone foundation was built on a hillside overlooking the valley. The location offered a perfect view of the mountains, the sky, the land, everything. Together, local craftsmen carefully restored the tractor's appearance while preserving its age, not making it new, making it respected. The unveiling took place on a bright autumn afternoon. Dozens of people attended. Neighbors, veterans, historians, families, even school children. A simple bronze plaque stood beside the machine. Its inscription read, Titan 1946, the machine that carried the truth and in honor of Shadow. Who refused to walk away, the crowd applauded. Many wiped tears from their eyes. Ethan did too, though he'd never admit it. Beside him, Shadow sat proudly, accepting scratches and attention from everyone. The local children adored him. The adults admired him. The veterans understood him. He had become something unexpected. a hero. Months passed. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. The nightmares came less often. The weight Ethan had carried for years slowly grew lighter. Not gone. Perhaps never completely gone, but lighter. Healing had finally begun. One evening, near sunset, Ethan sat alone on the hillside beside the tractor. The valley glowed gold beneath the fading light. Fireflies drifted above the grass. The mountains stood silent in the distance. Shadow rested nearby. The moment felt perfect, complete. Then the German shepherd suddenly stood. His ears rose. Ethan smiled. "Don't tell me." Shadow ignored him. The dog walked directly toward the monument, then began digging. At first, Ethan laughed. "Seriously?" Shadow continued digging, focused, determined. The same determination he had shown beside the tractor all those months ago. The same determination that had started everything. The laughter slowly faded, because Shadow wasn't playing. He was searching. Again. Ethan stood. Curiosity returned. The dog dug deeper, then stopped. His paw struck metal. A dull, metallic sound echoed through the quiet evening. Ethan froze. No way. Shadow stepped back. His tail wagged slowly, almost proudly. Ethan knelt. The soil gave way easily. Moments later, he lifted a small metal box from the ground. Old, weathered, sealed, hidden beneath the monument. For who knew how long? The sight sent chills through him. Somehow, impossibly, the story wasn't finished. The box opened with surprising ease. Inside rested only 2 items, a faded photograph and a folded note. Nothing else. No gold, no valuables, no treasure. Just answers. Or perhaps more questions. The photograph showed 3 men standing beside the original convoy. One of them was Samuel Lawson. The other 2 remained unknown. On the back, someone had written, "The last 3 who knew." Ethan carefully unfolded the note. The handwriting appeared old, elegant, steady. He read the message once, then again. The words seemed impossible, yet there they were, clear as day. You found the fortune. You still haven't found the final secret. The wind moved softly through the valley. The sun touched the horizon. For several moments, Ethan simply stared at the page. Then he laughed, a quiet laugh. Warm, peaceful, the kind that comes when life surprises you one last time. Shadow sat beside him, watching, waiting, the same way he always had. Ethan folded the note carefully, then slipped it into his pocket. The mystery could wait. For tonight, peace was enough. He looked toward the mountains, toward the ranch, toward the tractor that had changed everything. Months earlier, he had been a homeless veteran sleeping in an aging camper. Forgotten, invisible, lost. Now he had purpose, friends, a home, and a future. Most importantly, he still had Shadow. The dog who never gave up. The dog who refused to walk away. The dog who found far more than a fortune beneath the hood of a rusty tractor. Together, they watched the final light disappear beyond the mountains. The valley grew quiet. The stars slowly emerged overhead. And somewhere beneath the endless Montana sky, one final secret waited patiently for another day. But for now, the story was complete. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Walker was finally home. But for now, the story was complete. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Walker was finally home. If you believe loyalty, courage, and doing the right thing still matter, comment 1. If you'd have walked away from the mystery, comment 0 and tell us where you're watching from. In a world that changes fast, truth and perseverance still have a way of finding their way home. And if you enjoy stories about justice, dignity, and people who refuse to quit, subscribe and join us for the next journey.